So it's my pleasure to introduce Stefanie. If for the people who don't know her yet, Stefanie Hessler is the director of the Swiss Institute in New York. We've been knowing each other for some years through different things and different people. I'm the president of the Swiss Institute in New York, and I think some members of the board may be here or will come next week to Gstaad. So seeing the show of Stefanie in New York called Energies, I decided to ask her if she would have time to come and present it in Gstaad, because it was very relevant. So we will come back to this. But Elevation 1049 is a project that we would like very ambitiously actually to call the Biennale in the Alps. And it was co-founded with Neville Wakefield and Olympia Scary and myself. And very fast we saw that it was probably better to produce it with the LUMA Foundation if we wanted it to continue and to lead, to become sustainable. So it started, I think, because I cannot read, and in 2014, it started with an elevation iteration, the first one, which was dedicated to Swiss artists. So this is Pamela Rosenkrantz. I don't know. I didn't see the presentation yet. And then we had all this incredible work in situ in the Alps. So it's true that up to now we were more trying to show pieces outside, and this year this is an incredible piece. I don't know who from here takes the trip to go to the other side of the Alps, but it is become really quite a project for there, where eagerly it's just a biennial project, and it's awaited by many people who live there, but also people from the outside, from the contemporary art world. It has become, this was all the first year. Can you see? Yeah, this was a fabulous Roman Signer work. Yeah, huh? No. Olaf Reuning, yeah. The Roman Signer was the house that came down. I hope she put it in the presentation. Yeah, he had a house that was coming down. And this was the Douglas piece, which was really very atmospheric, where you were hearing wolf sounds, and it was just at sunset. And the fires around this body of water were very incredibly atmospheric. And Douglas, the day after, what we also expect to, very often from the artist, did a talk about it, which then was also very much attended. So what Elevation did at the time, throughout the years, this is the second year, did start discussions about how can you activate the Alp, how can you activate a dialogue that is cultural between nature and man, and we have been continuing this. In the beginning, there was nobody in Gstaad really, no House of Art, no Gagosian Gallery, no art salon. Art Genève was yes, but not completely. And there was a big emphasis, which still exists, on concerts, which were beautifully shown in small churches or in a tent. And we just made the whole conversation a tiny little bigger. So more and more the same type of people were interested in seeing both things. I love music, but I am a defender of art, contemporary art, and so the project that we had, which was the biggest of them all, was Doug Aitken's piece, which was called Mirage. People were calling it the glass house or the mirror house, which was completely prohibited because we had to say it's a sculpture, because of course we were not allowed to build a house there. And it was placed on the land of a farmer who was allowing us to rent it from him, and we had to put the invigilators around. But very fast, the farmer changed his mind, and we were not able to keep the piece the way we wanted for the length of time that we wanted. I mean, of course, if it's farmland, it's farmland. I understand perfectly, but he had promised that we could keep it there. We were able to keep it for nearly 3 years, actually, because of COVID, and things got paralyzed at some point. So then this worked, and so we decided to not let go of the project. We decided to continue. And right now, the two co-founders, Neville and Olympia, are not with us anymore. And we go to a new way of looking at the project, which is asking artistic directors on an annual basis or curators to join. And I'm very happy because of the show of New York that Steffi will present to you in a while. This is somebody that whom you saw in here at E.A.T, Ernesto, and he did this piece just 1 week after the E.A.T conversation he had here and after presenting to you. My aim would be, of course, to continue this, and this, I mean, I am quite pushed by many people who want me to continue it, because when I say me, it's the LUMA, it's a dedicated team. Yeah, it seems that it is important to continue to do art that is non-profit versus only art that is profitable and that you can hang on your walls, just to say it quite simply, yeah? And so the idea, who is there? Finally. No. It is really important so that we can continue the discussion. And also to take the discussion to the environment and the Alps. I think it's the biggest asset in Switzerland. Switzerland is such a small, country, but if you count the mountains in it, it's huge. It's a little bit like Greece. If you look at the coastal line, it's just maybe one of the biggest countries. To raise awareness for global warming, for the glaciers that disappear, and for this incredible asset in Switzerland that are the stations in the mountain, and that, I mean, St. Moritz is quite lucky because it's high enough, but all these other places that one after the others have to close their winter time to find other activities, other things to do, other discourse, culture coming in. I mean, this is, you name it, yeah, we could write a book about this. But so we continue, yeah, but I want to enlarge it to a bigger part in Switzerland, and I would like to install also pieces in the Engadin on with all the cultural force that there is here. I think it may be easier than when we tried to do it in Gstaad. So Stefanie came with a concept that she was already able to show at the Swiss Institute its energies, but she was also able to implement a complete new thinking at the Swiss Institute, and I want to congratulate you for this because it's really quite an important step forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maja, and thank you also Vasilis, Thiester, and Hans Ulrich, Dale, Christina, and everybody for having us here. It's such a pleasure to be back in the Engadin and to be in conversation with you. And thank you, Nina Canell, for joining us on stage. Let's welcome Nina, everybody. So I'll just give a quick context to what we're doing with elevation and with energies. And I'll keep it very brief. But at Swiss Institute in New York, where I work very closely with Maja and the team and the board, and artists, of course, I proposed to bring into the institution different ways of thinking about climate change and to invite artists into the conversation. So we do two things. We do the very boring but very important operational stuff where we measure our carbon footprint and then we take active measures to reduce them together with the team. This is transport, it's shipping, materials, energy, all of the stuff. We think also about communities and our workers and our teams. And we measure, and then we have a strategic climate fund where we invite artists to decide where we donate to in order to compensate for all of the emissions that we cannot currently reduce. But we make constant, very nuanced decisions as to what do we do? Do we take this flight? Do we produce locally? And so on. And the more artistic side of this is a project called Spora, for which you see some slides here, where we invite artists into the institution and what I think of as ecological or environmental institutional critique. And so we ask artists to change the institution and the processes. And the artist Jenna Sotela, for instance, made this beautiful sculpture for us, which is also a compost. And Jenna was inspired by a figure from Fraggle Rock, a TV show that some of you may know, where there is a trash pile. She's a matronly figure called Marjorie. And Marjorie has access to everybody's trash and with that also to everybody's information. So Marjorie is essentially an oracle. And Jenna filled this, or we fill this sculpture with our own compost. And then inside are hundreds of worms. And when they're happy and they produce heat, this generates the electricity for a speaker that is transmitting oracle messages made with an AI machine learning algorithm by the artist. And it's a sound sculpture, so our neighbors constantly hear this worm oracle sing. So it's functional, but it's also humorous. It opens up that space where you can think differently about how we engage with the environment. And of course, it's a humble intervention. But nonetheless, I think we need to start somewhere, and any and every action counts. And we hope to inspire people through projects like this. Here you see some of our worm friends. The artist Helen Mirror made an intervention that whenever we repaint the interstitial spaces of the gallery, so this is our hallway, our staircase, then we're not allowed to use any new paint, but only leftover paint or paint that was mixed by mistake. And so our commitment to becoming more sustainable is now visible on the walls of the building. And I actually really love that. Sometimes visitors come and they think, well, Swiss Institute, what's going on? It's not going so well. It's kind of on the verge of collapse. But I really like that, this kind of commitment and also critique of the white cube as the way to present art. There's a number of other projects that I won't go into depth on. Vivian Suter, fantastic Swiss artist living in Guatemala, who normally paints her large canvases in the forest, made her very first mural for us, where normally she lets the weather and the forest interfere with her canvases. And for us, it's the New York City air, including the pollution, interfering with the mural. And there's numerous other projects as well. And then last year, I organized together with the team an exhibition called Energies, which took its point of departure in a very, very local piece of history from the 1970s during the oil crisis. In a building a few blocks from Swiss Institute, a group of people who were activists, who were unhoused and needed a place to live, and some of whom were recent graduates from engineering and architecture programs and wanted to change the way things were working. They refurbished the building with their own hands, which is something that is now known as sweat equity. So they were able to buy the building from the city for very, very cheap, but they couldn't afford electricity. And so on the roof, they installed a wind turbine, which you see here, and solar panels. And in the background, this big industrial structure is the Con Edison power plant. That's the biggest energy provider in the United States. And so I love this picture because it's very symbolic, of course. You have this one person climbing this very fragile wind turbine. And the group, they started to feed any surplus energy that they generated back into the Con Edison grid. And Con Ed, I mean, it wasn't a lot, but Con Ed felt it marked a change and potential threat to their energy monopoly. And so they retaliated with a major lawsuit. And then these guys got help from a former attorney general of the US who was sympathetic to their cause, and they actually won the lawsuit. And this went all the way to Congress, where they were invited into hearings when a new energy regulation was created. And so this led in 1978 to an energy regulation which made co-production all over the US possible. And I absolutely love that this small story, this humble story in the East Village, led to major, major change. And so I think that we can really learn something from that moment at this time as well, that where everything is, seems pretty depressing, and it is, but nonetheless, we cannot stop, and we need to continue doing the work, and we need to do it in exchange with community and in all possible ways. So this was the starting point for the Energies exhibition, which we showed at Swiss Institute, including the archive that we assembled from the East Village. So we found and tracked down all the people who are still around, who were involved back in the day. On the top, you see a blade from the wind turbine, which they signed in a reunion in 2019, where a lot of them got together. We found a painting that was in a home of somebody who was somewhat involved with the community that had never been shown before. And we tracked that down in a private apartment, not of a collector, just of a friend of that person in Brooklyn, and brought it to the exhibition and invited also international artists from all over the world to exhibit artwork as part of this exhibition. This is a piece by Joar Nango, who is an architect and an artist of Sami descent living in the north of Norway, who is researching indigenous technologies. And he came across the description that Sami communities used the stomachs of fish, of halibut, that they took out and they dried them and stretched them like leather. Then they sewed them together and they installed them in the windows because they insulate against the cold, but they let light through. And so he recreates these architectures, and also makes a point of looking not only toward the future, but actually learning from the past when it comes to approaching big issues like climate change. This is an artist called Jean Katambayi Mukendi, who brings attention also to the inequities and energy poverty in Africa, where a lot of the resources to power the so-called green energy transition in the global north, the resources are extracted there. However, the continent hardly benefits from the green energy technologies, but they all go to the global north. And so these are what he calls his Afrolamp drawings, and then a truck with copper in the shape of trucks that he witnessed at the mining sites in the Katanga region, where he lives in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And numerous other works as well. This is a more historic position. Becky Howland, an artist who lives in a neighborhood, and her energy, architecture, and infrastructure drawings overgrown by weeds. Jimena Garrido Leca, an artist from Peru, whose work we'll also show at Elevation next week. Vibeke Massini, I really love this work. I'll say a few words about this. It's energy. So it's a battery that the artist charges at the site where drugs that have been confiscated by Border Patrol in the Netherlands gets incinerated. So when the police confiscate drugs, they burn them. And then at the site of the burning, the artist sources the energy that is set free during that moment of burning, and then charges this lithium battery with it. And at Swiss Institute, the battery powered a nebulizer that was emitting the smell of ozone into the air. And ozone, it's not actual ozone. Our gallery staff was worried at some point. They said, "You guys are poisoning us with ozone." I said, "No, it's the smell, synthesized smell of ozone." And that's the smell that's in the air just before lightning strikes. And also the smell of burnt out electrical equipment. numerous other works as well that we're showing in Elevation. Luisa Gagliardi will make a new commission actually for one of the transformer stations in Gstaad, which is a very particular type of architecture that has been disappearing over the last 50 years because the energy infrastructures are now largely hidden underground. So, Luisa works digitally, so she creates her paintings in a computer and then prints them. And I find it very interesting that we feel that energy is now disappearing or it's immaterial and it's all in the cloud, but of course it has very, very material substrates that are necessary to power also the cloud. Beautiful Gordon Matta Clark drawings that we showed as part of the exhibition, and we also replanted a rose bush that he had planted in 1972 in the yard of St. Mark's Church in the Bowery. And we found the scaffolding or the kind of cage that the rose was growing in, but the rose was no longer there. And so we, together with his widow and the estate, replanted this rose bush. And numerous other projects as well. I won't go into so much more detail, but I think we can transition on to Elevation and also to Nina, who has been working on energy for so very long, and whose work is going to be part of Elevation 1049. Yeah, and in the meantime, while we wait, I also want to say that I think it's really fantastic, Maja, that you wanted to bring the exhibition to Gstaad. And of course, you know that the snow cover in the Swiss Alps is disappearing. I read a statistic, very sad statistic, that snow coverage has lessened by 38 days since 1970. And I think people here have also been saying that that's really felt already. And of course, energy is also part of geopolitical conflicts, and energy poverty is so very present. Perhaps not in Europe or in the US right now, but definitely in the global South. So I think it's a topic that is very important, and I'm really glad that you had the vision of bringing this exhibition in a changed and an adapted form to Gstaad next week. So I hope a lot of you can come and join us for the opening weekend or see it until March 16th. And Nina, your work is going to be part of the exhibition, and you've been working on energy and energetics for so very long. Last year, we collaborated and you showed a new work that we're also going to be presenting next week in Gstaad, and that work is called Energy Budget. And it's a module of a video that you've been making for a longer period of time, I think since 5 years now or longer. Even longer, 7 years? Yeah. Okay. And the video and also a lot of your recent work is dealing with dust and with electrostatic charge of dust particles. So I was wondering, here we see a picture actually of the video that we're going to be showing, and I wonder if you could say a bit about that particular work to start.
Yeah, sure. Hello, and thank you for staying so long. We have to make it worthwhile for you guys. Where to start? Yeah, I mean, I think how does dust and energy come together? Well, you know, dust is a very good way to express energy because, you know, even if, you know, I mean, energy is such a ubiquitous term, and it is, you know, at the core of so many things, but yet it's, well, maybe it is just because of that, it's very hard to grasp, right? So the more we unravel, the more we see that energy transactions is really at the core of everything, and down to the vibratory states of, yeah, just absolutely everything. One of the ways that energy can express itself in this kind of more haptic, visual way is through particles. And I love dust, and I think a lot of artists have loved dust throughout history of art, and you know, it's that kind of unintentional composite of all things that are basically just falling apart continuously, and so I'm saying this because, yeah, dust is the kind of invisible protagonist of this video work, or this part of the video work that we're showing. So how does energy and dust come together in this work? Well, there's another problem with dust, the more general problem that most of us know, which is it accumulates, and it's very hard to kind of manage, and it just like creates this endless maintenance work. And one of the ways to remove dust is to use the fact that there is this little volatile charge on every dust particle. So I'm bringing you into the energetics of energy now, how energy moves through different systems on a micro level. I think many of us are familiar with this cleaning tool, with this duster, which is made out of feathers, which is actually ostrich feathers. So the feathers from this ancient flightless bird. And I've been really intrigued by that for a long time. There's another part to it, and that is that it's only the female ostrich feathers that are able to produce this charge that can hold the dust particles. So that's why the feathers from this ancient bird is the most efficient technology to remove dust particles. And one of the ways that this process has been industrialized is in the car industry and the car manufacturing industry. Excuse me. So basically, you have to imagine this, because this was the image that kind of haunted me for a long time, ever since I found out. And apologies if you're going to think about this now as well. Every time you see a car, that there's this possibility that this particular car once was going through the production line in the factory naked before it had acquired its coating, its coloring. So in this state, it's very important that there are no dust particles at all, to allow the car to acquire this even, beautiful color code. So we imagine the naked car going through the car factory and going through this tunnel of basically thousands of female ostrich feathers before on its way to getting dressed. And then we have the opportunity to film it.
You also mentioned to me the etymology of the word car or carrosserie, which actually comes from carcass. So there's also this idea of the dead body, or the skeleton of a car before it becomes assembled. And then, of course, there's the dimension of gender as well, of labor, of cleaning being produced by the female ostrich feathers of a steel car with all of its male connotations, and even a dimension of fetish that is part of the work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the kind of haptic takeaway from this bizarre material meeting between the feathers and the steel. But as you say, there's also like all this, there's a kind of surreal poetic moment, that unlocks a lot of all those things, like, the gendered nature of maintenance work, and, combustion and particle pollution and production, and, the newness of the thing, the newness of a car.
Perhaps moving from cars to pearls and to conveyor belts, and the image is coming up soon, I think, but we'll be speaking about different other works as well in the meantime. But you had a fantastic show in New York in 2023, for which you produced a sculpture called Mother of Dust. Here's the picture. And it was a conveyor belt with pearls on it. The conveyor belt was moving, and then there was a broom on it, sort of keeping the pearls always at the same space, more or less. And pearls, as I'm sure many of you know, are produced when a dust particle or some sort of irritation enters into a mollusk. And so the pearl is actually formed around this debris or this annoyance. And I loved seeing that work. I wonder if you could speak a bit more to the creation of this work in particular. And then we can move from there to other types of mollusks and shells.
Thank you so much. No, I think you described it beautifully, the process of the pearl itself, which is almost like, you know, a little miniature sculpture of some sort, and in the fact that it's durational and the fact that it's started, you know, by a kind of slippage of information or a kind of irritant of some sort. But the sculpture itself came together, you know, in this kind of assemblage way that I often work, that there is something, some mysterious thing that pulls an object to me somehow. And I fell in love with this conveyor belt and its particular form, you know, this very low, long object, kind of with a broken back already. So the first part was getting to know this machine and getting to know its speed in the room. And so the machine itself produces kind of like a drone, you know, it's like the circular movement in the space. And I was thinking a lot about this idea of the conveyor as well. You know, what is it supposed to convey? And I was sitting with this machine for many months, just trying to adjust the right speed, before I actually introduced the broom and the pearls that became this kind of other more polyrhythmic element of the work that was coinciding with the circular raga motion in the gallery. And the broom is the studio broom that had to be deassembled and recomposed a little bit for it to do its job. But yeah.
You've made another work for which you used, well, I think there were two versions of the work, one with 7 tons and one with 16 tons, or even more, of the shells of mollusks, which you used on a floor and where people could walk on the mollusks and were eventually grinding them down. And I think there's a beautiful connection to the material in the work and how you continue to use that throughout your practice, but also a connection in a way to the ephemeral or the durational. So with the shells that are built to protect an animal, but then they also become part of buildings because they're used in cement. And in the exhibition, people could walk on these shells.
Yeah, thank you again. You describe it so perfectly.
Next time I'll just give you this word, this title.
Yeah, it has been. It's true that I've attempted the sculpture a couple of times now. Most recently in Tokyo at the Mori Art Museum, and then it was 5 tons, and it's been all the way up to 18 tons. And I am mentioning, I think the numbers are important to mention to kind of get a sense of the brutality of this volume, you know, because I think that's what you confronted with, just this mass of organic material produced by animals, but nevertheless material that we also have this kind of I don't know, everyday industrial relationship to. So I wanted to bring a more haptic and bodily experience and relationship to concrete, and that I think began with just being very immersed in this little island that I spent a lot of time in the Baltic, where they produce a lot of cement. So you kind of see these two parallel worlds of the relentless industry, the relentless mining industry, and the geologists and the fossil enthusiasts that are, you know, speaking about the 500 and 600 million years of history of this material. So I think that what I try to bring forth was, that the concrete floor in the gallery is on a material level not very different from this, from walking on shells. But there is this other element, which is time, right? Which is irreplaceable. So it was kind of thinking about that and thinking about basically all the broken parts and broken bodies, really, that hold us up in various ways. And, on an animal, mineral, and also human level, of course.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean also with concrete, which of course when we speak about form, so as seashells, there's a completely different form, but also when used in cement, it becomes part of the building industry, which also, as we know, is one of the biggest polluters, contributing to CO2. So there's so many different dimensions in your work and in your interest in energy. Some of the earlier works of yours that I've seen are really these very subtle, very beautiful and joyful experiments of passing 4,000 volt through a piece of wood, or these very subtle sculptures that are cables that are cut, and cables that are normally used to conduce or to send electricity or information, and then that are interrupted and become sculptures in and of themselves. So here actually we see these, I think, were subsea umbilical cables. Can you say a bit more about what those cables normally do? This is at the Nordic Pavilion in 2017 in Venice, when Nina represented the Nordic countries.
Together with other artists. So the subsea cables, it's true, like you said, that I have sort of brought energy into my work for a long time, and I think in a more intuitive way, often try to kind of slow it down somehow, or make it access it in different ways. And when I started to work with these cable cuts, it was quite a different sculptural strategy, and it came from maybe more of a kind of conceptual route, always kind of in combination with the discovery or an encounter, because I wouldn't know how to make anything without, having a kind of unexpected element of surprise at some part. But to bring you into the story of subsea cables briefly, basically, I think, there's this description that Henri Lefebvre had about the city as a burning, blazing bonfire. And I think that was one of the things that really caught my attention and made me, referring to all the energy that coursed through our floors and ceilings and walls, etc. And I thought about why it's so quiet, why this fire is so quiet. And I also worked a lot with low-frequency recordings and recordings of natural electricity throughout these years, so I know about the kind of hidden frequencies. But I thought it's interesting that this human network also has to be so hidden under the sea, buried underground, and always kind of stacked away in this really convenient way. And so I think that was the impulse from the beginning, to just show the cable as it is, as a fragment, and as this kind of mute, physical, uncomfortable thing that is not fluid, that is not connected. So it's a very kind of scary, simple gesture of showing this connected object just disconnected like that. I wouldn't cut the cables myself, so it would always be somehow cut. It had to be cut anyway. So, But I think that that dimension of the possibility of cutting the cable is also very interesting, of course. After I started to dig up cables and source them in different ways, I became much more aware of the kind of political nature of these networks. And there was a brilliant book published by Nicole Starosiewski called The Subsea Network, I think around maybe 2015, something like that. And I learned a lot from her research as well about because I was very curious about the habitats of these cables, especially when we talk about subsea cables, and the more you find out, the more you realize that these networks are really not what we are made to think, They are really materially embedded, and they are rural, and they are aquatic, and they have these other social dimensions because the cables need to land in certain places. They are really territorial. They are not like this global free network. They are really territorially entrenched and reinforce a lot of power structures in our world. So the more I kind of found out about the nature of these cables, I'll stop.
Maybe one more question to relate also back to theater and to sound, because sound has been so important to you, and we talked a bit about Milford Graves before, and I wonder if you could just say something briefly about the sound recordings and energy in sound in your work.
Wow, yeah, I'll try to wrap up that one quickly. Thank you, Theaster. I thought it was brilliant, and I love that you played music in here, because, if we talk about energy, the song at the center was so poignant. I have also collaborated with some musicians, especially percussionists, and Milford being one of them, and maybe I shouldn't say collaborated, but we were kind of working in parallel for 6 months at the Artists Institute. And well, I was collaborating because my heartbeat was part of one of his performances. So, but maybe I think what is important to say when we talk about energy is that there are all these micro vibrations, and that there are all these ways in which energy, there's an ecology of static electricity that we don't talk about so much. And I think Milford was great in just showing us all these micro vibrations, and he did it very much by looking at the human heart and saying, look, if you want to know about a healthy heart, well, he always said go to the source. So that's why he looked at the heart in the first place. And if you want to find out anything about the human heart, you have to listen to it. And he listened to the heart as a drummer. And so he said, look, there are all these micro vibrations between the big thumbs. And you have to listen to all those in-between sound waves. And maybe that is a way to kind of connect to these recordings that me and my partner, who is also my collaborator for the video, I should have said much earlier, Robin Watkins, there is all that stuff that we treat as background, and it's not a background, and there are ways in which we can tilt this assemblage that we are in, and that is by tuning in to some of these vibrations and
yeah, brilliant. One of the works in Gstaad next week by Harun Mirza is also using two frequencies, 40 hertz and 111 hertz. And 40 hertz vibration has been associated with reducing the risk of Alzheimer's. And 111 vibration or hertz has been found in many Neolithic caves. So there's some sort of idea now that it was used for its healing properties as well. So there's so much about sound, vibration, energies, a lot more to be discussed. But we're nearing the end of our time.
I think we need to make a stop, and we will continue the discussions throughout the week that comes, and on the next weekend, and during the exhibition. I don't know if you wanted to. Thank you very much. It's super interesting, and I had to, yeah, I had to go and see it from down there because I didn't see the presentation before. Maybe we could put the slide with the list of artists, Stefanie, so we know who is showing next week and throughout the winter. This is maybe the moment where we can take one or two quick questions if there was something. I know the afternoon was long and you may not remember, but Theasta is still here, Hans is here, Vasilis, Stefanie, Nina, and I. Anything that has been occurring to you? Very short, because I promised Christina that we'll start on time, but Hans and I have had a little conversation. He says 10 minutes delay is not too bad. So, yeah.
Well, Nina, thank you really for your generosity in sharing your perspective. It's been wonderful to be immersed in your world, but I was wondering, how did this interest into energies and into these kind of relationships start? Because you talk about your practice, and in the last 2 days, it was very beautiful to also understand how the speakers, what influenced them and how they shaped their practice through time. So I was wondering what influenced your practice and how you built this such a critical approach, which is just really, really inspiring. Thank you. That's so kind. Thank you so much. Wow, it's so hard to disentangle, and I honestly don't know why. I know that I had a very kind of early impulse to dissolve sculpture somehow, and I was super interested in assemblages, and I came also from, an interest in music. So there is already this kind of, this desire to work in a durational way. But my work is also very devoid of humans. I was thinking about that. When we talk about Theaster, and I'm very interested in how elements come together and how there are these complexities of interconnectivity. I'm sorry, but somehow I found that in this realm of dissolving objects and. I think what we talked about briefly touched on this thing about going to the source as well, of having this desire to unravel materially something. And when you do that, you're in process, and you are in this kind of messy, fuzzy world, which makes you work in a certain way. I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question.
Other questions? I see one here.
Thank you so much, Nina. I want to, you say going to the source. Is it going to the source of the creation, the fundamental? Did Nikola Tesla influence your work?
Did you say Tesla?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, to me it's obvious.
It's very sad that Tesla has been, I don't need to mention, but I mean, he was really interested in remote connectivity, for example. So I think, and a very superstitious, interesting person in many ways. And I think that certainly there are certain stories where there is a willingness to connect different fields of knowledge as well, and strands of knowledge, spirituality, electricity, and but it's a different time. It's a really different time, I think, and we have a set of other questions that we also need to be very mindful of.
I'm not so sure it's different time, different. To me, it's the same issue. He had already fictional interview called The Last Interview, and it's a fiction interview by a poet, but the message there is so relevant today.
I will check it out. His last interview, you said.
It's a fictional interview by a poet. It's a theater piece. I read this 100 times.
Wow, beautiful.
There's
Thank you.
also,
Great.
of course, a connection to Gustav Metzger and self-destructive art or process, or not believing in any kind of, fixed object that needed to last forever.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.